Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
But the sea is so calm and peaceful.
There are so many horrifying things in it.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals. All these things we make no apology are the study of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't.
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 74. I'm your host, Sarah Head, with my co-hosts, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. And today we're talking about the Gungywamp. What is the Gungywamp? What makes the Gungywamp special? Is it the ley lines? Is it the old Celts? Or is it perhaps something a little bit more modern and maybe a little more mundane? Get ready to think critically.
You will see are a staple of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Head, and I'm joined today with my co-hosts, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. How's it going, guys?
It is going dandy. Spring is sprung around here. We got the daffodils are up, the crocuses. So it looks like no more snow. I'm all about that.
If you mean spring and crocuses, you mean the norovirus or God knows what that is making me sound hoarse today, then that has also sprung, yes. No, so I apologize to our listeners because I feel like garbage, and it will probably show. But we don't get sick days. We march on.
I think we've all got a little tickle or something. And I apologize in advance to our listeners if you hear banging noises. There is some construction going on in my apartment, and you get to enjoy it as much as I do. But today's topic, and I'm sure Ken is going to correct me because I have yet to pronounce this properly.
Let me try it. Is it Gungywamp?
No, it is Gungywamp.
Gungywamp.
Before Ken starts in on Gungywamp, in my research, I found a website claiming that Gungywamp, the word itself, is evidence of pre-Columbian contact because it is not a bastardization of a Native American word. It is actually Gaelic and means the Church of the People. But I, being a non-Gaelic speaker, ran over to Google Translate, which could never be wrong, and looked up the words for Church of the People in both Irish, Gaelic, and Welsh, and none of those words even came close to getting me Gungywamp.
See, I just assumed the Gungywamp was in the Monster Manual. I figured it probably had like 4 or 5. I figured it probably had 4 or 5 hit dice. It lived
Right.
it lived in a stone chamber, and it protected like Celtic gold. That's what I assumed.
There's a Gungywamp cat that is
Oh, there we are.
I didn't know that.
There's a Gungywamp camp that's supposedly kind of one of those monsters in the mist kind of things. So it probably has more hit points, but is also incorporeal, so it's very hard to kill.
So you need silver and or magic,
You need magic weapons.
Okay, got it. Yeah, because that's about as real as about what we're about to talk about.
Yeah. Listen, I like linguists. Some of my best friends are linguists. But goddamn it,
whatever's about to happen is going to go very well. I'm sure it will.
Yeah, but it's we've seen this before, and we will see it again. If somebody takes this kind of a random set of letters and say, well, you know what? If you change some of these letters around, we can prove that this is actually Chinese. Remember how when we were talking about the Zeno narrative that Admiral Zishmini. Well, if you change those letters around, it's the Earl of the Orkneys. He said, well, how the hell do you do that? It's not. I would not call this a definitive science. This kind of linguistics, historical perspective on what a word possibly means and where it comes from.
Also, be blunt. Is anybody who's doing this an actual linguist usually?
Well, no, of course not.
There's that too.
There's that problem, yeah. But it's Gungywamp a fascinating site. It's a really interesting place, and there is so much mess associated with it that it certainly is worthy of a podcast.
All right. So we are where? What part of the world?
All right. Here's the deal. We are in southern New England. We are in southeastern Connecticut. We are in Groton. Now, just by way of a little, by prefacing this, I actually gave a talk yesterday at the P.T. Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut, southwestern part of the state.
Of course you did.
And it was actually a building that P.T. Barnum built to house some of his stuff, and is now the P.T. Barnum Museum. It's closed. It's been closed for a few years because it got hit by a tornado.
Oh.
We never get tornadoes in Connecticut.
That feels very Wizard of Oz.
Doesn't it? Oh, it's perfect.
That the one tornado you get takes out the P.T. Barnum Museum.
Does it have a great egress?
No, it does not have a great egress.
Oh, what the hell?
But it doesn't. It doesn't even have the Fiji mermaid,
Aww.
which apparently it has a copy. It's kind of like the fake of the Cardiff Giant.
Well,
they have a fake Fiji mermaid.
No, that's beautiful.
Does it have the fake Cardiff Giant?
No, it does not.
Ah.
However, it has a centaur. The skeleton of the
centaur.
Yes,
that is beautiful.
Oh.
That is amazing.
Really nicely done. But anyway, so I'm talking about 50 Sites book, and at the end, honest to God, somebody comes up to me and said, "Oh, give my regards to Jeb and Sarah. I love the podcast."
Oh wow!
That's some random guy at a conference me giving a paper in Bridgeport, and this guy understands the podcast based on my conversation. I don't know about you guys. I occasionally get this. Oh, that archaeological. You're the guys who debunk stuff, and that kind of bothers me because we've alluded to this in the last couple of podcasts that if we were just about debunking, we're done in 5 minutes. We can go home. It's a 5-minute podcast. Remember I think with the Sharon Hill's discussion, this very eloquent first 5 minutes, Sharon completely deconstructs and debunks the whole concept of ley lines.
Yeah,
ruins them. And we're done. Why are we
Yeah.
still talking about this? A couple of podcasts ago, we were talking about corn in the Roslyn Chapel. And we talked about the Zeno narrative. As soon as we revealed early on, well, the guy Zeno who discovered this, he admits that he discovered it when he was a little kid. He ripped it up into shreds. And what you're reading now that people take so seriously, he reconstructed it when he was an adult. And you say, well, why are we still talking about it then? Haven't we just completely debunked, put to bed, put to rest the whole notion? But that's not really what we're about. Yeah, we do debunking, but we're so much more about understanding the context. What is the cultural context of these weird beliefs? How about even the political and economic context?
We are being anthropologists, and I have to say,
it's almost like we're trained to do that.
Yeah, just a little. At some point, I actually made the realization, and this was actually a slightly discomforting realization, because that's what I think for a long time I told myself that, for a long time early on, I'm all about teaching critical thought and showing what's wrong, blah blah, and I was, and we are. I mean, that is part of what we do.
Sure,
but at some point, I realized, I'm an archaeologist. I want to study the past through material remains. But a lot of my involvement in this is I also want to be a weird shitologist. And this is not a new thing. I mean, this goes much deeper back. And the people I talk to this about, I talk to my students and they just find it interesting. And then I talk to a lot of my colleagues. A lot of the colleagues who we talk to about this, they also kind of have that interest. And I think there is this growing understanding that this is not just let's be negative why things are wrong and be skeptical.
Right.
It's no, this is a thing worthy of study. And I think the thing we have discovered, all three of us have discovered in our own ways, is that not only is this worthy of study, this actually kind of becomes and we talked about this on our beginning of the year show, it kind of becomes almost sort of like a backdoor to much, much bigger issues. And I don't want to get into that.
Absolutely.
Here, but I think the Gungywamp example is going to kind of allow us to do that once again.
Yeah, absolutely. And because again here, you want in 5 minutes, okay, Gungywamp is a late 18th, early 19th century farm in southeastern Connecticut. They raised sheep. They had pastures for sheep. They butchered sheep. They probably produced vellum, this parchment that you make from calf skin or sheep skin, and that the site itself has the physical evidence, physical footprint of a southern New England sheep farm. Okay, I'm done.
Well, now hang on. Now, if I go to the Wikipedia, go to Wikipedia, the source of all human knowledge, it says Gungywamp, excuse me, is an archaeological site in Groton, Connecticut, United States, consisting of artifacts dating from 2000 to 770 BC, a stone circle, and remains of both Native American and colonial structures. Now, I knew we were going to talk about colonial structures or extra-dimensional Celtic doorways, as we'll talk about, but there is an actual, like, even you would agree, pre-European component. And for our audience, a component is a sort of chronological section, like a period of use. There is a pre-colonial component at the site?
Absolutely.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. The concept that we brought up in a podcast a while ago is this notion of the palimpsest, this idea that there are these layers and they are tightly bound together, and until you are able to separate out each of those layers, you have this melange, this mixture of a bunch of different things. Yeah. Which we have to separate because they happened at different times. This is particularly true in the early historic period, proto-historic period, where there's not a lot of stratigraphic development at this site. There's not a lot of time between these various uses of the landscape, and you have to be very careful. Otherwise, you end up with a story that is a mixture of different peoples, different times, and different cultures.
Yeah, the most beautiful thing for an archaeologist is to have very discrete levels of use that are then separated, and there's another level of use. The reality is that we don't always get that. And if you walk around like your hometown, wherever you live, you will see buildings that are 150 years old, and you'll see buildings that are 25 years old, and the same is true of artifacts. And sometimes that's just what we have to deal with. It's not always discreetly, nicely segregated in terms of stratigraphy. That's just not always the case.
Gungywamp is a great example because it's a continuous use site. And that's really, it's common, as Jab's saying, but the nice thing about the continuous use sites like Gungywamp that eventually went out of use at some point is we can look back on it and we can literally trace human habitational history back from the point where the farm ceased to be a functioning farm all the way back to the pre-Columbian native peoples who were obviously living there because we have evidence that they were there. And so that's kind of neat to just watch the evolution of the use of a space.
See, the thing though, that's a little bit misleading about that Wikipedia entry, horrors, there's something misleading in Wikipedia, is that while there isn't this very nice, clear, neat stratigraphic sequence at the site, there is a kind of locational stratigraphy. In other words, those artifacts that are 2,000 years old, they're not at the colonial farmstead. They're a couple of 100 meters away in a rock shelter.
Yeah.
And so it's when you say, you can't just say, well, there's the Gungywamp site. No, there's a region which today is called Gungywamp, but that region involves a few hundred acres, and it's only when you compress all of that, not just stratigraphically, but geographically in terms of location of the landscape, it all becomes part of the same story.
Well, and that gets to two issues. Basically, what you just described is not unlike what we talked about in our last episode with Sharon Hill about how people that, like Alfred Watkins, who try to draw ley lines will use 3rd century BC, 13th century BC, 12th century AD, 17th century AD, and they will just assume it's all the same thing. And then secondly, archaeologists actually don't have really great definitions for what the hell the word site means.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Like that, some people are very like, oh, this rock shelter was here. Other people are like, oh, here's the city of Teotihuacan. It had 250,000 people for 1,000 years. That's a site, right?
Well, or here's a point or a flake.
Yeah.
I found this while I was walking doing my survey. I now have a site based on a flake.
Yeah,
I mean, the definition of the
very
word site,
confusing.
it's very
Right.
confusing, and for people who are asking for actual controversies in archaeology, there's constant discussion about what determines what is a site. Is it a single flake, or is it a whole city complex?
And that's actually led to a whole other field of, we talk about survey where we go and we find sites and we map the landscape, but there's a whole alternative approach to that, or a complementary approach called landscape archaeology that kind of sort of rebels against the whole concept of a site anyway.
Yeah, right. Think about again the palimpsest term. Imagine a group of folks live in a place and then they abandon that place and their objects, their material culture is spread out over an area. But then another group soon thereafter moves into that area and the center of their habitation isn't necessarily exactly the center of the previous habitation. And so you get this geographic overlap and very little stratigraphic division, and then another group, and then another group, and it becomes extraordinarily difficult. That's why archaeologists are obsessively careful about digging sites.
This is actually something I didn't understand. So you're not just talking about this being like when we talk about palimpsests, we usually talk about a lot of stuff that's not really well segregated stratigraphically.
Right.
And you're talking about geographically, but what you're actually really talking about is conceptually, that these things are there. That these are a conceptual palimpsest. In other words, people are throwing things together conceptually. Right. And that, honestly, and I don't want to get immediately hostile about this, that starts to get to motive, because it becomes a matter of why are you incorporating this with this? And I think that starts to get to who is doing the incorporation and why.
So before we get any further into this, because we're coming up on a break, can we get just a real quick history of, the discovery of Gungywamp and the lifting of Gungywamp into the public conscious, just like in the next 4 minutes?
Let me do that in the next 4 minutes, but then I want to sort of go back and put Gungywamp, but all of these other these claimed Celtic or Phoenician sites in a broader why people embrace that and why they think, well, yeah, that's a good explanation. Here's the deal. Gungywamp, first of all, it's private property. It's actually owned by the YMCA, and they have, this is for a long time, and they've been concerned for decades about people coming on the property and getting hurt because they're interested in what this old site is. So generally speaking, it's private property. You're trespassing if you go on the site. For a very long time, there was a local gentleman. His name is David Barron. David Barron is a really interesting guy, not trained as an archaeologist, not trained as a historian, but he was kind of our version of Barry Fell, our local Connecticut version. He had an idée fixe, right? He was obsessed with the notion of Celts coming to the New World long before Columbus got here, and in fact, even long before the Norse. And he is responsible more than anyone else for, and this is beginning more than 50 years ago, popularizing this place as our Mystery Hill. It's our Celtic occupation. He formed an organization called the Friends of Gungywamp and got a lot of folks. It's one of those deals where it struck a chord that a lot of folks living in southern New England who are in fact descendants of Celts. These are folks who came over. They're Welsh and Irish and Scottish and English, and they came over to America in the 17th century and 18th century. And these are the folks who can trace their ancestors back to the Mayflower. And there is the impression I have is they're sick and tired of hearing about that Italian guy who discovered the New World, or those Scandinavian guys who discovered the New World, because right here in southern New England, our ancestors were here first. And I am not the first person to notice that it's folks of a Western European Celtic genealogy who are the ones who embrace this notion the most strongly. And I think that there is that kind of ethnic pride that, you know what, we've got something older than anybody else has. And, well, of course, let's forget about the Indians because they don't count.
And this is a fairly common phenomena that we've looked over, and it's one that we have to deal with delicately because
Oh, sure.
it leads to some really ugly words that we're not going to use right at the moment. But yeah, it is motivated by not necessarily fact-based reasons.
Well, it's ethnic pride. We see that very clearly in the Kensington runestone.
Yes.
Where you can go up there and you can buy little license plate holders that say, Alexandria, the home of America, the origins of America. Again, forget the Indians, but we were here first.
Well, and
Right.
and to be fair, I would argue, and I'm certainly not the only person that argues by any stretch of the imagination, that a lot of the motivation for archaeology has that somewhere in it, whether it's literal ethnic pride or, you know what? We're the heirs of civilization. How do you know we're the heirs of civilization? I built this giant museum behind me. It took all the cool civilized things from around the world and put them in there like a civilized person would.
Right.
Right. I mean, nationalism is a known motivator for archaeology.
Nationalism or creation of class identity. I mean, this. Right. We've talked about this. Archaeology is getting into the origins of things to explain why things are the way they are. So you can criticize that. On the other hand, there's also but this thing you're saying just simply isn't true, which is a different issue.
Right. And when you mentioned class, Jeb, and unfortunately that has reared its ugly head with Gungywamp. Dave Barron, who was, I met him, sweet, really interesting guy, had a thing about the Ivy League and people with an Ivy League background, and was very, and part of the thing here is that people from Yale, people from Harvard have investigated places like Mystery Hill, have tangentially investigated places like Gungywamp, and have declared that these are colonial, these are 18th, these are 19th century. And in the hikes that Dave Barron would give at Gungywamp, he was very, very clear in being dismissive of anybody with an Ivy League education, or most everybody with an Ivy League education, and that those patrician guys with their noses up in the air, those ivory tower Ivy League scientists, they don't know what they're talking about. We're here, we're on the ground, fingers dirty, our fingernails are dirty, because we really know what was going on here, and the Ivy Leaguers, they don't know. So there is that class element
we talked about that in our first episode of the year, where I was Little Miss Sunshine, and it was like, by the way, this all has to do with class structure. But
yeah, let's go to break real quick, and when we come back, we can start getting into
let's give you some historical context. Yeah.
Women in Archaeology is a show about archaeology by the women of archaeology. An alternating panel of women archaeologists discuss the issues in archaeology that impact professionals and the public every day. Check out Women in Archaeology for a different perspective on the past today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/WIA. Now let's get back to the show.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
And we are back, and we are talking about the Gungywamp.
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 Is it swampy? Is it a swampy area?
There are swampy places within it, but the colonial farmstead there it's pretty dry.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a farmstead, I would hope, unless they're like farming muck.
Well, I lived in New Orleans. I can't really throw stones on those.
Right, exactly.
That's true.
There are no stones there because it's New Orleans.
They all washed out to sea.
No, they're all under. They're all under river. They're all under river mud.
Oh, God.
That's why you have to like sink giant piles to build anything more than 2 stories tall.
Well, we're in southern New England here. We got nothing but stones.
Yeah, you got
But
all.
That's actually part of the story.
You have all the field and flagstones.
Hey,
Yeah, we got
Indianapolis is built on a trash heap, so
All
I
right.
got you beat. Anyway, go ahead, Ken. Give us
All
more.
right, I want to provide way broader context. Why does Gungywamp? Why do people find Gungywamp? Its location, the things that are found. Why is that mysterious?
Because
really,
it's I know this one. It's a vortex, Ken.
it could be a vortex.
It's a ley line vortex.
We are going to talk about the paranormal context of Gungywamp. I think in the 3rd segment here.
Yeah, I think I just heard my ears burning. So
Yeah, there you go. Listen. Let's start before the settlement of Connecticut. It's 1524, and Giovanni Verrazzano, who's an Italian navigator, freelancing, so he's working for the French, crosses the Atlantic, 1524, and he's looking for a Northwest Passage. He's looking for a way around this new place. And he makes landfall the border of like North and South Carolina today and travels north. Because south, he knows, well, that's Spanish are all over there, and they don't have a route across to the Pacific there, so I'm going to go north. And he travels. He actually finds in North Carolina Pamlico Bay, and he decides, I'll sail up there because I think this is the end of the continent. It's not. And then he continues going up the east coast, and he keeps bouncing against that east coast, looking for some bay, looking for an opening, looking for some way around the land. Because again, he's being paid by the French not to explore the new world, but to find a way to Cathay and Cipangu, right? China and Japan. He actually somehow he misses Chesapeake Bay. What the hell kind of navigator he was, I don't know. But he finds the mouth of the Hudson. He wonders, well, even though it's going north-south, maybe I'll be able to sail up this way and hang a left, go west. Sails up the Hudson a little bit. That doesn't work. Sails down to the mouth of the Hudson again, and he's only got one choice. He's come from the south, so he doesn't want to sail there. He can only go east along the coast of what is today Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. Because remember, he wants to go west, but he's got no choice. He hopes, well, maybe this is a peninsula. So he sails along the coast of Connecticut, as far as we know, first European to do so. The bad thing for him was he's not finding a way west by doing that. The good thing for us is that there's a very short but extremely detailed narrative produced by Verrazzano of what he sees along the Connecticut coast. And he talks about seeing native villages along that coast. And he talks about what their houses look like and what their cornfields look like and what they look like. Verrazzano, it's 1524, 1525, is one of the first, not the first, but one of the first Europeans who actually sees Native Americans up close and personal and says, God, they look like they're from Northeast Asia. And he looks at the shape of their eyes, their skin color, what their hair looks like. So that's an amazing source of information. He gets to Narragansett Bay, which is Rhode Island today. He thinks, well, maybe I've reached the end of the continent. I'll be able to sail north and then west. Sails into Narragansett Bay. He anchors the boat. He realizes it's just a bay. He can't get through the New World that way. Anchors the boat, though, and he and his men do like a 2-week walkabout in which they explore certainly Rhode Island and probably part of Connecticut and Massachusetts. They encounter native people. They describe what their houses look like, what their villages look like. Very interesting stuff if you're into ethnohistory, ethnography, archaeology, history. They get back in the boat. They leave Narragansett Bay. They continue sailing east. That's the only direction they can go. They sail around the south shore of Cape Cod. And at that point, Verrazzano basically gives it up. He says, I'm not going to find a way to go west here. Sails east, back to France, gives his report. He sails back again, I think, to South America some years later, and he disappears. And one of the stories is that he's killed by cannibals and eaten. Anyway, in Verrazzano's report, he talks about encountering lots of Native Americans. He never, remember in the Zeno narrative, Admirals Zishmini and the two Zeno brothers are constantly running into people on these far-flung islands in the Atlantic who speak Latin, thereby that's how they can communicate with them. And that's showing that, oh yes, Europeans have been there for ages. Well, Verrazano never says that. He says he never talks about seeing white people. He never talks about seeing people speaking European, not Latin, not any Celtic language, not Irish, not Gaelic. He just sees Native Americans.
Well, clearly, as a member of the Illuminati, he's hiding the Templar colonies that he ran into.
Well, he would have to do that, wouldn't he? He's obliged to do that.
Here's a legitimate question. Not saying that that Jebs wasn't.
It was not.
Why do we accept his account of his early contacts with Native Americans and with the early continent? Why do we accept his account when we reject Shishmi's or so many others? I mean, there's parts of Columbus's accounts that are not taken seriously. How do we tell the difference?
Well, I think that ultimately all of these accounts can't be taken at face value, of course. You've got Champlain, for example, who lived among the Iroquois and the Huron and became friendly with them and wrote a lot about them. There are elements that Champlain, for example, said that the Indians of what is today New York State have no religion and no gods, and then talks about the spirits that they worship. Well, obviously, it's matters of his perspective of what constitutes a religion, its language. In the case, all of these, though, are wonderful in presenting us with hypotheses that we can test on the ground. So when Verrazano says this is what I saw traveling along the Connecticut coast, and when we do archaeology, when subsequent people move into these areas and describe them, when we do the archaeology, we are able to confirm at least some of the material claims made by Verrazano. That's very different from the Zishmini and the Zeno narrative, in which we can't test any of that stuff, or when we try to test it, none of it bears any fruit. There's no supporting evidence. So
there's another thing. You just said supporting evidence, Ken. There's the fact that this coheres well with the physical evidence, with other accounts and so forth, rather than looking nothing like those things, and instead looking a lot like old, tired narratives that we keep running into as basically myths of self-aggrandizement.
Right, and ultimately the Carl Sagan line that extreme claims require extreme levels of proof or support. Here we are seeing things that Verrazano says that we know match what we have from other streams of data, these converging streams of data. So they all point in the same direction. If he were talking about something dramatically different, that would be interesting. But if there's no supporting evidence, we would reject it just the same.
All right. So for Verrazano, basically, then we while we can't take it as face value, he shows up and says there are no colonies of Celts or anything there.
Exactly.
All right. So that's the point here.
All right, that's part of the point. Then the point is that the British kind of ignore that. I mean, they're hearing about this as well. Everybody's looking for a route around the continent.
Right.
It's not until Adrian Block in like 1614 entered that. Adrian Block is an explorer for the Dutch, and he enters into Long Island Sound. Block Island in Long Island Sound, a large island with a large native population, is named for Adrian Block.
I did not know that.
Block sails up the Connecticut River and establishes a fort north of what today is Hartford, so about halfway up between the coast and Massachusetts. What the Dutch recognize, and now the British, of course, you've got the Plymouth colony in the 1620s. There now is this competition. Okay, screw it. We're not going to find a way around this continent, but man, there's wealth to be found here. There are colonies to be established, and an explorer putting a flag on a shoreline and then leaving. The next explorer comes, kicks down the flag, and says, "No, I claim it for someplace else." If you have boots on the ground, if you have people speaking your language with your culture, worshiping your God, and they're living there, that's a much firmer claim you have to that land. And so the Dutch and the English are starting to do this. In Connecticut, in the 17th century, in the 1600s, after Adrian Block is kind of pushed out because the British take over. It's why we are called New England, not New Holland, because of the British just did a much better job here of establishing colonies. And those colonies were along the coast and along the major rivers. The good farmland here in southern New England, that's you were talking about. In the west, we have the Housatonic River that drains the uplands, flows into Long Island Sound. The Connecticut River, which is ostensibly, it's an Algonquian word meaning the long tidal river. That's the major stream that drains all the way up to northern New England, straight down to Long Island Sound. The river on the east, and I am pronouncing this correctly if you're living in Connecticut, the Thames River. When I first moved to Connecticut and I saw that we have a river here called the Thames, I called it the Thames. And people looked at me like I was from another planet. They go, no, that's the Thames. Okay, fine. Those major rivers with their extensive floodplains were the magnets for early agricultural settlement in Connecticut. So that in the mid-1600s right up until the mid-1700s, that's where farming people know that's where you go. That's where you can find good farmland. That farmland fills up. And beginning in the middle of the 18th century, with a few exceptions, the Farmington River Valley, which is where I've done a lot of my work, is actually exceptional in being a large secondary stream that feeds into the Connecticut River that has an extensive floodplain. So the communities were growing up in the Farmington Valley in the middle of the 17th century as well. But by the middle of the 18th century, the good farmland is all taken.
Is this European? Are these European cultigens, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So these folks it's rye, wheat, oats, barley. That's what they're bringing in. Now, once that happens, population settlements begin to expand into the inland and uplands of southern New England. This is true in Rhode Island. This is true in Massachusetts. It's true in Connecticut. That land is marginal for farming. It's rocky. It's hilly. The soil is extremely acidic because we have a lot of conifers. And it's a pain in the ass to farm. Some of these communities made it for a while. We're talking decades, maybe a century at most. But economically, they just couldn't make the nut. But during that period from the middle of the 1700s to the middle of the 1800s, extensive deforestation happened in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, because forests were being cleared to make pastures. So some of those uplands were okay for pasture. They weren't great for farming, but they were okay for pastures, for sheep, goats, and cattle. So those trees were being cut down to create the pastures, but also because we had a very substantial iron industry developing in the beginning of the late 18th, early 19th centuries in Connecticut.
So a lot of need for fuel. Fuel,
absolutely. Coal fields of Pennsylvania were not yet open to folks in New England, and that fuel. This is a side issue, another palimpsest. I will occasionally get calls from people who say, I was walking through the woods and I found an Indian burial mound. Now, we don't have Indian burial mounds in southern New England. And I have gotten one call saying, I think I have found an ancient Celtic temple because it's this big circular mound with a ditch around it. And I have to explain to people, well, those are called charcoal kilns. They are everywhere in southern New England. That charcoal was being produced to feed the iron furnaces in western Connecticut. Cut down a bunch of trees, you put it in a dome, you dig a trench around it as a fire break, a collier begins a fire in the center of that dome, watches it, you don't want it to burn to ashes, you don't want the fire to go out, you release all of the moisture, is gone by the time the fire is done. So what you have is real high-density fuel made primarily from hardwoods, but softwoods were okay as well. So we have in the state of Connecticut used to have a Department of Environmental Protection and a separate Department of the Environment. In a cost-saving measure, I don't understand how it saved any money. They consolidated those two departments, so we now have a Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Interesting. The Department of Environmental Protection back in the day when they were the DEP put together a spreadsheet of what they knew about the level of forestation in Connecticut. And at European contact, in the beginning of the 17th century, it's estimated that over 90% of our state was forested. By 1820, with the spread into the uplands, by 1820, with the cutting down of trees for the iron industry, it's estimated that Connecticut was only 25% forested.
Good job, us.
No kidding, right? The thing, though,
go
is
settlers.
as that happened, Sarah, as those communities, places like Gungywamp, but there are hundreds of them spread across the state of Connecticut, as they became abandoned, as farming was simply not economically viable, those lands went back to forest. And the irony is so many of these sites are preserved because the land was of such little value, the state took it over and made it into state parks and state forests.
So Gungywamp was probably abandoned around this time then?
Yeah, more than likely we're looking at the mid-19th century.
Abandoned as a settler's homestead.
Exactly.
Not necessarily abandoned by, I mean, it obviously had been abandoned by the Native Americans.
Yeah, it had been before, right. And so what's going on is these trees are all growing back up.
And I know there's been a lot of great work using LiDAR to find all this stuff that nobody knows.
Oh, man, LiDAR is so cool.
But here's the thing. So what, and this is extraordinarily typical. People today walk through those woods, and they're walking through the woods in 2017, and they look around and they say, wow, this is really spooky. We are in the middle of the freaking woods, and there are stone walls all over the place. Why would anybody do that in the middle of the woods? Oh my God, there are these stone structures in the middle of the woods. Why would anybody do that? Yeah. There are stone structures, there are outbuildings, there are stone walls, there are wells, there are even cemeteries in the middle of the woods. And the question they ask is, there must be something really weird going on here. This must be much more ancient than anybody can imagine. And these things must be not simply mundane because they're in the middle of the freaking woods. Right. And you have to tell people, but no. What you're looking at the landscape today is not what the landscape looked like in the late 1700s through the middle of the 1800s. It was very different. There were no trees here. These were active farms. There were mills up and down all of these streams. They are abandoned because they became economically non-viable. But so what you're looking at today is not what it looked like in the past.
Right, but Ken, once you say that, once you've gone and done historical research, archaeological research, that makes you one of those evil, nasty Ivy League educated types. You're not pretty much letting people believe and say whatever the hell they want.
You're being very close-minded.
You're exactly right, but you know what? It's even worse, Jeb, in that they let me say what I want, but they ignore it. I'll give you an example. So I've given a number of tours. I've given a number of tours at Gungywamp. It's an interesting site. It deserves investigation. So I'm giving a tour, and there are a bunch of folks with me on the tour, some of whom are firm believers in the fact that this is an ancient Phoenician or ancient Celtic site with astronomical alignments, and we can get into that. This whole notion that, you know, if wherever you're standing you can see some point in the horizon, it must be an astronomical alignment. But in any event, we've just walked through and Jeb and Sarah, you will appreciate this. The people who owned the farm, it was the Addams family.
Oh my God, how awesome.
How great is that, right? So the Addams family owned this. It was a sheep farm. There are a bunch of them scattered throughout this area. Again,
the sheep or the Addams family?
Well, the sheep. You can't farm here. Pastures for sheep, that kind of worked for a while. But anyway, so we've just walked through what is clearly, obviously, a home, the foundation of a house. Right across from that is the foundation of a barn. If you're looking on the ground, you're seeing artifacts scattered around, rusted metal, pieces of harnesses and horseshoes. Very clearly, it's a farm. We walk 75 feet away from that, and this is what everybody gets excited about Gungywamp. There are 2 stone chambers and a double ring of stones. Now, I say to the people with me, look, I can explain these things as being regular farming facilities in the 19th century. And wouldn't you know it? Now, remember, it's about 20 seconds of time between we've walked through what clearly everybody recognized as a house. We get to here, and I say, well, this is part of this farm. And somebody raises their hand and says, but we're in the middle of the woods. Why would this be part of a farm? I said, were you conscious 20 seconds ago when we walked through the farm? And it's this inability to put that together. No, this is weird to me, so therefore it must be inexplicable.
Let's go to break real quick, and when we get back, we'll start talking about what is weird about the Gungywamp.
I'm Jessica Yaquinto, and I'm the host of the Heritage Voices podcast. Heritage Voices focuses on how CRM and heritage professionals, public employees, tribes, and descendant communities can best work together to protect their heritage through tribal consultation, collaborative ethnography, and indigenous archaeology. Now back to the show.
Ready to level up your career? Text DISH to 44043 now to dive into a world of exciting technician opportunities at DISH. From cutting-edge technology to a supportive work environment, DISH offers the perfect platform for your success. Connect with us today to discover how you can be part of a dynamic team driving innovation. Connect today and join the DISH family, where innovation meets opportunity. Text DISH to 44043 to kickstart your journey towards a rewarding career.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
And we are back, and we are still talking about the Gungywamp. And Ken, we started getting into what makes Gungywamp so dang special.
Yeah. Well,
apparently it has a henge, is what you're saying.
Well, almost.
Kind of.
And by henge, you mean a farm.
Yeah, exactly. A farm. They're practically the same thing. So, look. A colleague of mine, Giovanna Neudorfer, who worked at the State Historic Preservation Office in Vermont, wrote this wonderful book called The Stone Chambers of Vermont, and in which she goes through a series of these things. She creates a typology. She looks at the historical documentation. She looks at whatever little archaeology there's been and said, you know what? These are farming facilities. These are root cellars, and they are ice houses, and we know what they are, and we know that they're not particularly ancient. And what Giovanna, I think she coined the phrase cultural amnesia, that things that a 5-year-old from 200 years ago could tell you exactly what it is, an educated person today is clueless, and so is therefore susceptible to all kinds of bizarre explanations. We don't have root cellars anymore. Yeah. We don't use those. And so when we see one in the woods, which makes it like uber spooky, it's like, ooh, it must be something incredibly strange or weird or paranormal.
I'll tell you what's really impressive to find, and I've only ever seen 2, and they've both been along the coast here, are spring houses.
Oh, sure.
Those.
What the hell's a spring house?
It's what it sounds like. It's like a root cellar, but it's built around an active spring.
I thought you meant it was like on springs, like some kind of like Baba Yaga chicken foot spring thing.
No, but that would be cool.
That's impressive
but
too.
They dig. I mean, they find a spring, and then you build your house near it or close by it, but you don't want crap getting into your spring because you want your water to be crap free.
Right.
So they build a house,
Around it.
stone house around it. And usually also it doubles as a root cellar of some variety or a milk house, a dairy house of some sort.
Well, that's entirely logical, but I had no clue.
Yeah. They're cool as hell because by the time you find them, they're just these empty stone. They look like shrines with flowing water inside of them. But anyway, go ahead, Ken.
And in all likelihood, somebody has seen one of those and said, my God, this must be a shrine. Because they don't know about spring houses.
Yes, America Unearthed did that.
Yeah, early on, Jeb read I was at the Wikipedia entry and talked about this double ring of stones. Now, if you just read that and don't look at a picture, you think Stonehenge, the stone circles of Europe. In fact, these are recumbent. They are not upright stones. They're stones that are carved into two concentric circles. So there's one ring and then a larger ring.
Are they carved?
Yes, they are carved.
It looks like a busted ass well.
But here's what it is. And this is again, this cultural amnesia. That is, for any historian working in New England, you know that is a bark mill. When you don't need a large setup, you don't need a water wheel, you want to build a dam and then have to build a raceway. It's a smaller operation. And what you want to do is crush stuff. You make a double ring of stones. You position in that double ring of stones vertically a mill wheel. The mill wheel has an axle running through the center. Outside of the double ring, there's a harness. You harness an ox or a mule or a horse to it. In really small versions, you don't even need a harness. You can just have a person pushing it. That axle goes into the center of the two concentric circles where it intersects and connects with a vertical axle so that goes down into the ground, so that when you put stuff in that double ring, in that channel, you then have the draft animal or the really strong person pushing or pulling that horizontal axle. As they walk in a circle around the double circle of stones, the mill wheel turns, and anything within that channel defined by those two rings of stones gets crushed. If you are running a tanning operation, you need to extract tannin from oak bark and acorns. The best way to do that is you throw acorns and bark in that channel. You throw water on it. You have a channel where you're going to collect the liquid that comes out of that. You have the animal or the person walk in that circle. The mill wheel turns, crushes everything. The liquid pours out. It's full of tannin. That's why we call it tanning a hide. It's from the tannin that's used to tan that hide. We know this was a sheep farm. They almost certainly produce vellum. That's what that is. But you walk through the middle of the woods and you see this, and because you don't tan hides the way they did in the 19th century, it looks strange and mysterious.
Yeah, see, I like the idea of it being a mill wheel, but I assume that they're putting Celtic human sacrifices in the outer wheel, and when they're crushed, their blood runs in, which opens the extra-dimensional portal in the inner wheel. That just seems logical.
That certainly is an alternate hypothesis, Jeb. I mean,
hold on to that thought, because later on, when we get to some of the windowsills in the outer houses, and we start encountering the ogwam that's there, we'll talk about blood grooves again.
Yeah. We can do that. So anyhow, here's what we've been talking about so far is extreme. Okay, it's fringe. There's no archaeological evidence that Celts were there. There's no archaeological evidence Native Americans were there 2,000 years ago. Absolutely. Europeans were there in the 18th and 19th centuries. Absolutely. There's no evidence for a foreign group of people bearing a foreign material culture coming into this area anytime in between. But the claim that maybe it's Celtic or maybe it's Phoenician is within the realm of science. We can test that. Things get really weird, though, and it's in the last few decades where now we don't care about Phoenicians or Celts. What we care about is that the stone chambers that I'm saying are root cellars and one's maybe an ice house, in fact, are portals to other dimensions. And this is where we have Jeb here.
I should get a nickel for every time I say things like Max Weber, re-enchantment of the landscape, John Keel, Jacques Vallée. I mean, the simple reality is that these things look like they are ready-made follies. They look like old ruins. They're in a nice wooded landscape, and once you're there, then you're into sort of antiquarian archaeology, and once you're there, then you're into the realm of, as I've talked about again and again, you're into the realm of the fact that archaeology is often seen as an entryway into sort of the mythic past, and that mythic past inherently ends up going supernatural.
Right? I mean, and you have people going there saying a number of things. Now, people now today who go to Gungywamp, some of them say that time changes. There's a time dilation. That you're there and you see people around you, and yet they seem to be frozen, like their time has slowed down for them. And
What's that? What that's referencing? First of all, there's the concept of the times. There's three things here. One, there's the concept of the time slip. This idea that a lot of people in Wulandia love of you can sort of slip through time. The second one is that you could also maybe rope in here the idea of being away with the fairies, that time moves differently in fairyland and feyland. But most likely what you're actually running into here is this notion that started to be propagated in the 70s, especially the 80s, of what's called the Oz effect. And there's other people who have written about this idea that in certain paranormal events that things will seem strange, that sounds will stop and everything will get suddenly still, and that in essence you are not really in mechanistic time. And this has become an increasingly popular idea, and it's also one that people in Wulandia like to use to suggest that all of these things are related, that it's not Zeta Reticulans and big apes and spirits of the dead, that this is all some larger phenomenon that's tied to each other because they all share this notion of a sort of an Oz effect. And that sounds like what you're describing to some degree.
I guess, but there's more. If that's all there was, there's more. And this is the Cliff of Tears.
Oh, this is the thing. What is this?
Yeah. So here's the thing. And this actually is within the last couple of decades. People have gone to Gungywamp and experienced, and I'm not going to question their experience. They've experienced these highly charged emotional reactions. People, even at the site itself, feeling strange, feeling extraordinary, sensing something not right, something bizarre, something they don't experience in their everyday life. And this is concentrated in a cliff, the trail leading to a cliff that it's actually not right there at the colonial site. It's some distance away. People climb up to this cliff and spontaneously burst into tears. That is, everything's fine in their lives, they say. They go up to the top, and it's not necessarily a sad reaction. It's this just extraordinarily deep, intense, emotional reaction to being there. They start to cry. And if that's all there was, that would be pretty weird, but it gets worse.
I was going to say, is it just particularly really pretty up there? I mean, I could understand being overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of nature.
It's, you know what, it's every other pretty woodland landscape in southern New England. It's pretty, but I've never burst into tears there. But it gets worse. I mean, bursting into tears, okay, you have an emotional reaction, I get that. The claim is also made, and I want Jeb's take on this, that people spontaneously begin to bleed from their noses, from their ears, from their eyes. What the? If you'll excuse me, we haven't cursed yet in the show. What the fuck is that?
All right. So I don't know about why this specifically the stigmata type thing, but what this sounds a lot like. This sounds a lot like. All right. So I don't know if have we talked much about Mothman on here? The whole Mothman prophecies.
No.
I don't want to get into what it is, but it involves prophecies and other things. Bridge collapsing, it's not really archaeological, so we really haven't talked about it, although there is an Indian curse element, which is problematic to say the least. But basically it's about a winged beast and prophecies and UFOs and Men in Black. And at some time in the 2000s, one of the more popular of the TV shows went to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where this all occurs, full of ghost hunters. And they brought a psychic medium with them, as they all do. They did these other things. When I went to Point Pleasant in 2008, I was very steeped in the sort of the not traditional lore, but like the John Keel lore and the Gray Barker lore of the Mothman. But this TV show had been there, and they had been on TV recently, so everybody was talking about finding orbs.
Oh, orbs. I love orbs.
What does that have to do with anything involving the friggin' Mothman? And the answer was the TV shows that all have the same cookie cutter had just gone there, and so now that's what you do there.
Okay.
I mean, it's a group phenomenon. I don't mean like orbs. What I mean is that once you have this idea that you do a thing at a place, even if it makes no sense for like the quote unquote history of the place, you do it. Like I have become convinced. At some point I realized that people who go Bigfoot hunting, it's actually basically an outdoor version of a seance. They go in the dark, they yell for like the spirits, the Bigfoot, to talk to them, and then they wait for rapping on trees. That's a goddamn seance.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and you're talking about bleeding, and you're talking about extreme emotional events. I am not a scholar of religion in like the most detailed sense, but that starts to remind me of xenoglossia, speaking in tongues, having the spirit, all these kinds. And there are multiple traditions that have this. This becomes a way of basically, and again, I don't want to get outside my ballywick here too much, but it feels like people are. There's, again, the folklorists will yell at me. There's the notion of ostension, that a place has a story and you go there and you help enact the story. And in doing so, you help create the story.
I love this concept. It's really complicated, but I do enjoy it. And it kind of goes back to the stone tape thing that we've talked about a few times, where a place records things and then replays them back, but only because so many people have gone and either recorded these things into the stone or have reinforced the recording of. So it's like kind of a self-feeding loop. Well, the thing couldn't happen unless the people were there doing it, and since the people are there doing it, the thing will continue to happen.
I don't know where the blood thing comes from. I'd have to know more about the specific site. But once these places have, first of all, if they have a story, that story will persist. But also, it can change. Basically, once you mark the place as weird and spooky because it's got quote unquote ruins, whatever the sort of weird and spooky of our day means will, to a large degree, imprint itself. Hence, orbs at Point Pleasant, and people looking for EVPs at Gettysburg, where, of course, what they used to look for was people in Confederate or Union uniforms showing up in photos. But now it's EVPs because, well, people on TV wave meters and tape recorders around, so EVPs. And that's we've talked about Mystery Hill here. People go on ghost hunts to Mystery Hill. What the hell?
Right.
What is it's the same thing.
And we haven't even talked about the most common thing that we hear about the Gungywamp, which is very similar to the Mystery. It's identical to the Mystery Hill thing. And that's the whole Celtic monks coming here and the trip of St. Brennan and all that.
Well, that goes back to is it Goodwin? Is that the one it goes back to?
Goodwin is Mystery Hill. Yeah.
Was he involved in Gungywamp also, or no?
Nope, he was not.
Okay.
I can't find any connection there, but it's a very similar, this whole Celtic connection thing and the Celtic monks thing has a very similar story in that there is, I don't know if there's evidence of it. Ken might be able to back me up on that since he's out there so frequently, but there are allegations that the Gungywamp has been rearranged in order to kind of fulfill this idea of a Celtic monastery being built there.
Well, there are two things that I wasn't going to bring up. One is that, yes, to the best of my knowledge, at least one of the stone chambers has been massaged. When you know what when you think you know what it should look like, and it doesn't quite look like that, and so therefore you make it the way you think it should look. Well, that's what Goodwin did at Mystery Hill. But there's an even. But all right, you guys are both sitting down now, right? There is a rock. There is a rock at a boulder, piece of bedrock, or a large ceramic, I don't know which, at Gungywamp, that people who've done the documentary research know that it was a boundary marker, and the initials of the person who owned the adjacent property are etched into the rock.
Right.
God forgive us, the initials are JC.
Oh God.
Who is JC? Well, really, it could be IC, but well, no. Let's make the rest of that loop so it's JC. And in fact, yes, it's Jesus Christ. So some Irish monk, and that's the weird thing. It's Celtic from 3,000 years ago, but it's also Irish monks from 500 years ago or 600
Right,
years
and this is
ago.
where the math doesn't line up. And
Because antiquity is flat.
It doesn't.
Right.
Exactly.
It is antiquity.
Exactly. And
I am always amazed at how easily it is to debunk some of this stuff by simply doing math. Like, you don't even have to do archaeology. You just go 1 minus 2 does not equal 5.
But Sarah, we started. We'd be done in 5 minutes.
Right.
We have nothing else to talk. We got nothing else going on here, folks. And there's another issue. The issue here that I think is really interesting too is why the woods are perceived as being intrinsically spooky. So there's scary shit in the woods. And I was thinking about that. I'm not a huge fan of the Blair Witch Project movie, but I think it was a pretty scary ass movie.
No, it wasn't. It was horrible. Shame on you. Shame.
Right. Okay, I forgive me. But now here's the deal. Let's redo that entire movie, only instead of same dialogue, same characters, same story, but let's do it on a beach in Hawaii. It's not scary at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is cross culture, and this gets into people talking about like psychological modules and sort of these deep seated ways that we deal with different environments. Because if you go around the world, and it makes logical sense, you know, it's a simple matter of what you can see, what you can't see, that it's inherently dark, that these places have more sounds, that there really are, until you know you kill them all, legitimately more predators in wooded areas and so forth. Now, on the other hand, the sea is legitimately terrifying.
But the sea is so calm and peaceful.
There are so many horrifying things in it. Don't even.
Lots of ways to die.
Yes. No, and that's not surprising. Like that does not bother me that people would see that. But it gets back to what you're talking about, the plasticity of this. I mean, woods, in fact, the scarier woods are the ones that grow up quickly because they're full of things. They're full of, secondary growth and all of that.
Right.
You get a nice forest canopy and an open floor that's been there for a long time. That's peaceful. You know, oh my God, we can't, and that's the thing. And this actually gets to I'm not a huge fan of the Blair Witch Project, the movie. I like the documentary they made about it that was mockumentary. Was actually supposed to be part of it. I think we talked about that before. One, they're in Maryland. It's not far from anything. I've been to Burkittsville. I've been there, and it's a lot of it's stuff that is right near roads, and a lot of it's been farmed and refarmed and secondary growth. It's not, primeval. And in fact, in the actual story, they do time slip. Like, they basically do go out of time. There's a very Lovecraftian component, very much like Dreams in the Witch House, which is, of course, what you're kind of getting at Gungywamp, this idea that, it's not just, there are still people that love it's just ancient Celts and it's, just hyperdiffusion. But frankly, that doesn't seem to cut it for most people. And I kind of suspect it never entirely did. Mm-hmm. And all of this starts to become a flag for, again, a re-enchanted landscape. And part of re-enchanting that landscape is basically taking stuff that resonates. Part of it's the ethnic pride thing, but frankly, and this again goes back to, we mentioned this before, these various sites there, Mystery Hill and others, they often get claimed to be inspiration for the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. And there may be something to that, but much less than most people have made of it. Mm-hmm. A bigger influence on him was Arthur Machen, who was writing about Wales and England and the stone sites there, and Lovecraft was pretty much just plopping them down because they resonated with him for deep historical reasons. And I think, frankly, you're seeing a lot of the same thing here. And we talked about this with our fairies episode, that yes, there are pre-European ideas of little people in these areas, but they've also syncretized heavily with people bringing old world concepts here and not bringing them 1,500 years ago, bringing them 300 years ago. And so you've got that too. So I mean, the woods, I think, inherently around the world kind of have people put a mystical element on them, and I think that actually makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
But beyond that, people are basically re-imprinting the landscape with things that already make sense to them, both logically in some cases and more folk religion-y and folklorically in others.
It also makes sense in that this kind of modern mystification of the Druids, the ancient Celts, So it's like a twofer. You've got, okay, it's hyperdiffusionism, but the people who are here, they are really spooky. That's a spooky culture. So maybe that then really matches with this notion that there's weird stuff at these sites, and it has something to do with some remnant of these weird druids and celts.
It's the edge of history, and if you go back in several of our previous episodes, because we're running out of time, I've talked about this idea that you basically have the quote-unquote modern era that people think of, their last few hundred years, and shallow antiquity, this idea of a flat antiquity, a palimpsest like we've been talking about, and the edge of that is usually things like druids, and they often are given a mystical bent because they have a foot in each side. And we've talked about this in more depth elsewhere, and I'll be talking more about this in the future, but that's exactly what's going on here. And in the old world, just like we did with our ley lines episode recently, any kind of standing stone, even if you can identify it as a cider press or part of a church or part of a mill, becomes part of that edge of history.
Right.
So those were our final thoughts then, I think.
Well, my very final thought is Gungywamp, though on private property, you can, if you'd like, you can see it. You have to go. We'll give you a link to the Pequot-Cephas Nature Center that they have been given permission by the YMCA to run tours of the site, and they're great people. They know it's a 19th century farmstead, and it's a really cool place to visit. Don't go there on your own.
Well, yeah, but now that you've mentioned it, Ken, how do we get you to give us a tour?
I have given tours, but always through them. So if we can get a whole bunch, what we should do is get a whole bunch of Archaeological Fantasies podcast listeners together. We'll have a conference in southeastern Connecticut, and we'll tour Gungywamp.
Oh my God, you've set this up.
Oh,
all right, people.
Listen, we should do like a whole thing. We'll go to Mystery Hill. We'll go to Gungywamp. We'll visit a couple of other abandoned communities and abandoned graveyards. It's the Spooky Tour 2018.
Yeah, and we'll get thrown off at least a few of these properties.
That'll be awesome, you guys.
More than likely.
Spooky Tour.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
No, we're doing this. I don't know how we're doing it yet, but we're doing it. Ken's eating those words.
All right. Listen, great fun.
Thank you guys very much, and I will talk to you later.
We'll call. No, we don't do a dinosaur.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher, and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archaefantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaefantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archaefantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at ArchaeFantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/ArchaeFantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.